All right, the guy that runs all of this thing, he's a current operations manager. He calls himself the chief dishwasher around here at the Ludwell Fellowship. After serving in the U.S. Army and French Foreign Legion, he got involved in conservative politics. And for the last 8 years, he's worked as an operative, that sounds like a dangerous word, Ben. He's worked as an operative consultant and commentator. Ben lives in Concord, North Carolina with his beautiful wife, Catherine, and he writes his Substack over at Where the Wasteland Ends. Ben Dixon.
Well, I want to start by thanking you all for coming. I obviously believe that the work that we are doing here at the fellowship is absolutely critical. And as Father Iggy said last night, I do believe that one day our descendants will look back and remember the work that this generation has done to help plant the church in the South. So thank you all for being here, for contributing your time and talents. I want to especially thank our sponsors, Dean Davenport, James Holloway, Jim Jatras, George Kauser, and although she doesn't want to be recognized, I want to thank Llewellyn for all that she has done to help us put this together. I also want to give a special thanks to Rebecca Dillingham, our former chief dishwasher, who dragged me into all this. Getting to know Rebecca and Stephen this last almost 2 years now has been a tremendous blessing. We have trauma bonded over the last year or so as the Lord saw fit to bring us into a great struggle. And as we've discovered since then, this set of struggles is far too common and yet often unspoken. We both felt strongly that there needed to be a discussion about it here at the conference because as we come into the church, we often get distracted by the beauty of the iconography, the richness of the hymnography and the literature, and we sometimes lose sight of the fact that coming into the church is Christ leading us to the cross. And we are all going to have a cross to bear, and being able to bear it is what will allow us to build the future Southern church, the future American church. So with that being said, I dedicate this speech to my good friend and sister in Christ, Rebecca. Unless it's terrible, then, I rescind my dedication. I've written and delivered a lot of speeches, but usually to a bunch of soulless politicians, not a room full of tremendous men and women of God, of whom I deeply respect, so forgive my audacity. So what is the topic of this lecture? What is its purpose? The 30,000-foot level, a nice way of saying it, is right there in the title, Navigating Obstacles in the Southern Orthodox Mission. There are a great many obstacles or struggles which we face coming into the church, but also throughout our lives as Orthodox Christians, and understanding these struggles and how to navigate them is critical if we wish to see the faith spread across this land that we love so much. The nature of these struggles can be broken down, broadly speaking, into two categories, internal and external. But from the perspective of the individual Orthodox Christian, I think we can break it down into three categories because the Trinity: external, ecclesial, and internal. By external, I mean struggles between the Orthodox Christian or church more broadly and the non-Orthodox world around us. By ecclesial, we mean struggles within the church among the faithful, and this can include struggles between those striving to preserve the faith as it was passed to us from our fathers and those who are seeking to change it and to make it look more like the world. We can also include here struggles within our parishes, often between pious Orthodox Christians. By internal, I mean personal spiritual warfare, struggles against one's passions and sinful inclinations, of which we all have. This last area is crucial insofar as it will determine whether the struggles Christ sends our way turn out to be soul-profiting Podvigs or lead us to soul-destructing Prelest. For those unfamiliar with either the Russian tradition or the word more broadly, a Podvig is a spiritual struggle which the Lord sends us for our benefit, broadly speaking. In summary, the lecture seeks to be an overview of spiritual warfare as experienced in our times and in our parishes. It's a reflection on the many pitfalls which await us from the moment we enter the church, based largely on my own experiences, guided as they have been by my spiritual father, Father Onufri, although often that looks more like me being dragged kicking and screaming by my spiritual father, my godparents, and others who have shown me what Christian love and wisdom truly are, and which I hope to emulate in my own life. I'm not special or different from anyone else, although my wife would probably say I'm a bit more stubborn than most. And so I presuppose here that many others have or will experience similar things. In terms of the external struggle, it was my intention to begin here, but I'm going right after Jim. So thank you, Jim. You took about 1/3 of my lecture. It's no secret that the world we're living in has gone a bit off the rails, and it's easy to be pessimistic about where things are going. We continually find ourselves more and more out of step with a modern American society which has confused freedom with permissiveness. But as this has happened, many, including many of us, have seen the light. We have found the true faith and fled to the church. We are seeing right at this moment a flood of Americans, especially Southerners, coming to the faith, kind of the point of this conference. People are coming across material, be it online apologetics or homilies, a friend or family member who is converting, and seeing that there's something here, something real and tangible, and they're drawn to that. True freedom and an experience of God that is faithful to Scripture and history is what the Orthodox Church is for most people, and we're finding it. And for Southerners in particular, this thing they found feels less of a foreign entity and more as a rediscovery of our own inheritance. As with all things in life, this gain, this growth we're all seizing comes with risk. People coming to the church are doing so from a distinctly non-Christian culture, one defined by consumerism and self-obsession. And far too often, people try to reconcile the views of the church with their own instead of conforming their views to that of the church. They want a worldly, middle-of-the-road orthodoxy that can not only reconcile with the world, but fit in. And unfortunately, when they do, they find that there is a group within the church awaiting them with open arms. Not having appropriated the mind of the church, these folks see academic achievement is equal to, if not surpassing, that of clerical rank. We recently saw where a group of Western academics, professed Orthodox Christians, wrote an open letter against a supposed heresy, one that, as a matter of fact, they made up. And this letter was written in the form of a synodal decree, but since none of them had an episcopal rank with which to put down, or a C, they wrote where they got their PhDs. It's not only audacious, it's arrogant. But it's precisely the small, statistically irrelevant minority of misled believers who the church's external enemies have latched onto. They provide them with substantial donations, allowing them to amplify their message and grant them legitimacy through Western academic institutions, themselves the church of modern Western civilization. They join with the external enemies of the church to wage an informational war on those of us who wish to preserve the traditions of our fathers as they were passed on to us so that we can pass them on to our sons and daughters. Many in this room have been in their crosshairs on a number of occasions. Fortunately, there are many who are defending the faith and building up the media and social media infrastructure necessary to refute the arguments and claims of this disingenuous few, who are ready and willing to take the arrows necessary to defend the truth and stand up for the church. We need to support these folks, not just with our prayers, with our time and talents, and this is in part why this fellowship exists. This is why we allow anyone to submit an op-ed to the blog, why we're opening up membership and planning to build a greater infrastructure across the South, God willing. And we need all hands on deck. Compounding the issues we have briefly touched on above and will likely return to shortly, we face a shortage of clergy at all levels and near total absence of catechists, and as a result, a large number of catechumens and newly illumined are coming into the church with an incorrect understanding of what orthodoxy is. This is often exacerbated by the plethora of online apologetics and Orthodox social media personalities who, as with all things social media, do not always reflect the heart of the church or correct theology. And to be clear, I'm not against online apologetics. I think they're a great thing. I think many of us in the room have come to the church from it. But social media has a way of bringing out the worst in people, and then it doesn't reflect the church and the love and support that we all find here, but something else. Father Seraphim Rose, in his last public lecture, titled The Orthodox Worldview and delivered at the St. Herman's Retreat in Platina, speaks of two false paths which many fall into on their way into the church, which are particularly poignant today. The first and certainly most widespread in the world today and characterized in the Orthodox Church by the tendency of us new converts to rush to high theology and to start an online career as an apologist, or to dub our political views as orthodox and those of others as heterodox, is what we might call the Hegelian fallacy. According to Hegel, religion is just a lower form of philosophy, and while many of these folks would say that theology is, in fact, the highest form of philosophy, this is merely the flip side of the suppositional coin. They still view orthodoxy as a body of beliefs to be understood by the rational intellect, a system which can be mastered through academic efforts. In short, they make orthodoxy into an ideology, but this robs orthodoxy of its savor. Orthodoxy is a way of life. It is the very fabric of our reality, it is the real living connection and experience of God, and we can never forget this. Otherwise, we risk simply bringing the scholasticism of the reformers into the church, and as a result, any progress that we would make in the faith is strictly on the horizontal level. And this is why we have seen many men and women who, in spite of showing great zeal for the faith and writing tremendous theological treatises or even being ordained as clergy, soon find themselves outside the church. And we can only call this a great tragedy. As Vladimir Lossky reminds us, there is no theology in the church divorced from the mystical experience of God. St. Gregory Nazianzus did not write his theological poetry because he had studied the greats. St. John of Kronstadt did not write My Life in Christ, nor Maximus his Ambigua because they had studied and memorized text, but because they had struggled for decades against their passions and sins, spent decades in prayer and partaking of the Eucharist, and the Lord illumined them as a result. He had revealed his mysteries to them, and so they were able to shut the mouths of heretics when they spoke of a God they did not know. It was the triumph of those who knew Christ and then ascended to the heights of theology, defeating those who knew the wisdom of this world. This approach also leads to Orthodox Christians whose hearts are cold, not only to those outside the church, but even oftentimes in our parishes. There is a sort of Puritanism where we want to deem anything outside of our specific view, which is very limited as people just coming into the church, of what orthodoxy is. And usually the first victims are the supposedly ignorant cradle Orthodox Christians and the parish babushki. After all, what need do we have of compassionate old women whose lives have been sanctified by decades of prayer, whose hearts shine out unto their fellow parishioners, who are the keepers of our traditions, if they can't explain in detail the doctrine of the Trinity? Without the vertical ascent gained by the struggle towards moral purification and the selfless service to others, we will likely read ourselves right out of the church or leave the moment we come to face to face with the fact that the true church is not necessarily the perfect church. The other common pitfall is pietism, or what Father Seraphim Rose calls false spirituality. Those who come to the church and see it only as a personal spiritual ascent. This could be typified by a sort of consumerism that we've brought into the church. We have to have a prayer rope that matches every outfit, shirts, hoodies, all the icons. These things are not bad in and of themselves, and we should support Orthodox businesses. But if we are just transferring our consumerism from car builds, from protein powders, from whatever else into the church, then we are not ridding ourselves of the passionate impulses which are fed when we click the checkout button. As Professor Andrei Osipov of the Moscow Theological Academy reminds us, the passions are unquenchable. And when they are satisfied, they grow, demanding ever more novel pleasures, including those against nature. Pietism could also, perhaps more appropriately, be typified by a conversation I had with a friend recently about what's going on in Ukraine. And he said, well, I'll just hide in my prayer corner until this is all over. With the wide availability of the writings of some of the church's most exalted spiritual writers, be that St. Gregory Palamas or St. Simeon the Theologian, many are coming to the church and immediately picking up these texts and attempting to reach these exalted states of prayer before they've even reached the baptismal font. They fail to realize the dangers of seeking such a state or even fantasizing of such things, of visions and visitations, of feelings. In the aforementioned lecture, Father Sarah Rose stated, quote, "It is all very well to be aware of this truly exalted side of Orthodox spiritual life and to have reverence for the great saints who have actually lived it. But unless we have a very realistic and very humble awareness of how far away all of us are today from the life of hesychasm and how little prepared we are even to approach it, our interest in it will only be one more expression of our self-centered plastic universe. The me generation goes hesychast. That is what some are trying to do today, but in actuality, they're only adding a new game called hesychasm to the attractions of Disneyland," unquote. The Fathers warn us against pursuing such states, and it's a surefire way for us to be led into Prelest. One cannot reach deification or illumination without purification first and foremost, and it is this state that most of us in these last times will spend our whole lives engaged in. Speaking precisely to this end, at another point in the aforementioned speech, Father Sarah Rose says we must realize deeply what times we live in, how little we actually know and feel our orthodoxy, how far we are not just from the saints of ancient times, but even those of a generation ago, and how much we must humble ourselves just to survive as Orthodox Christians today. I think the key issue with this error, the pietist error, is that orthodoxy is not a personal spiritual ascent, and it must be open to the world. The vocation of the Orthodox Christian is to sanctify the world around him, to bring it to God as an offering of love. And that begins with letting Christ transform our hearts by allowing the wellspring of grace, which was planted in our hearts at baptism, to be actualized right here and now. When we try to shut ourselves out from the world and from our parishes, we are, in reality, shutting ourselves off from the grace of Christ. We are diving off the side of the ark of salvation into troubled waters and saying, "Don't worry, I got this, I can tread water." This is right where the enemy of mankind wants us. While these two deviations from the royal path are common for the new convert, and perhaps a temptation for us all, they are avoidable. Both are perhaps more likely in our times because of the shortage of clergy and the sheer scope of responsibilities our parish clergy shoulder. This means that many inquirers, and even up to newly illumined, are getting their catechism online and therefore more likely to learn of orthodoxy as a way of thinking instead of a way of being. As we discussed above, information alone does not make the Christian, and this is because there is a clear difference between knowing about somebody and knowing them. I knew of my wife in 2018, but I did not know her until I drove 6 hours to Charlotte and sat down with her and tried to do things that would make her happy and maybe even like me. Thus, the key element often missing in catechesis and continuing growth in the faith is the importance, indeed the centrality of service. Far too often, as Father Peter reminded me last night, it's always a few people doing all the work, or as some would say, 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. But serving others is at the heart of the Christian life. Service, and service performed out of love without expectation of thanks, is why every son sees his mother as a saint and every parish is Matushka. Service is especially important in mission parishes. And in the South, most of our parishes are missions. We are a mission church. Catechumens must not merely be taught the centrality of service as a concept, but actively engaged in the service of the parish. Whether that is making coffee, serving food, cleaning up shop, as helping with the bookstore or library, cleaning the floors and windows, beautifying the church, maybe even, and I'm just spitballing here, helping to clean up this conference hall at like 6 p.m. Teaching them the structure of the services or the tones so that they can participate in the services once they've been received into the church is another way to instill service and further their education in the faith. I had no idea how great Matins was until I sat and read the canons. It was deeply enriching to my faith. The early church understood this well, and it's all but common knowledge, at least in the Orthodox Church, that in the early church, catechism ran for 3 years. Now, I'm not calling for a 3-year catechism, But for the first 2.5 years, it really wasn't up until Lent that they would start to participate in lectures about theology. So what was going on that first 2.5 years? Well, they would go to the liturgy of the catechumens, and then they would have some type of moral instruction. They would serve the parish. And the main focus for that early portion, the best I can tell, was focusing on moral purification and serving others. And when you hear the remarks of pagans writing about the early church, they always speak of the love that they had for one another and how selfless they were towards one another. How when a Christian was sick, they were all in the hospital with them. How when they were destitute, they would take care of them. This is what we are called to do. Now, clearly, this wouldn't be quite possible today, as what used to be the internal teachings of the church is now online for all to see. Most people would hear 3 years until baptism and walk out the door. I probably would have. But we can still learn things from the early church and integrate these into our own parish lives. It is this process of moral purification and the acquiring of the heart of the servant, of the mind of Christ, which is the fruit of proper catechism, of what is essentially Orthodox basic training, firmly rooting us in orthodoxy. This is critical to their salvation, i.e. catechumens, and ours, because an improperly trained soldier is dangerous not only to themselves, but to those around them. As Father Seraphim Rose wrote in his introduction to his translation of Blessed Paisy Velichkovsky, not being deeply grounded in orthodoxy, the human side of the church all too often becomes the center of attention. And the all too prevalent petty quarrels and injustices among church people are often sufficient to turn his attention away from the church altogether, or if some religious interest remains, for him to run towards one of the flourishing religious or social cults of the day, or even to the widely advertised life of drugs and immorality. Spiritual warfare is not just thumbing a prayer rope by candlelight in our prayer corners as demons encircle us, whispering things into our ears, which they will. While we may expect the battleground will in some point be our marriage, our work life, our social life, it often seems to slip our minds that one crucial battleground, and a particularly painful one of that, will be in our parishes. We have here dubbed ecclesial struggle. Strife within a parish, or what my dad may call church hurt, is extremely painful. To have those who called you brother or sister, or worse still, my son or daughter in Christ, to then treat you as a leper and publican is crushing. Few are they who don't experience such struggles at some point in their life, and yet this topic remains somehow taboo. Why? There's no reason that we should suspect that our parish lives would not at times be difficult. Anyone who's read church history is certainly aware that it's basically 2,000 years of the history of church drama. After all, Arius wasn't a pagan philosopher, he was a priest. Nestorius was a bishop. St. Maximus the Confessor didn't have his tongue cut out by the pagan Bulgars or the Muslim Moors, but by the Christian emperor and his soldiers, that very government that worked in symphonia with the church. Satan is attacking the church at all times and in all places, and most of these attacks are happening in the hearts of the church itself, our hearts. This pain, if we are not rooted in the faith, can drive us out of the church, as was said. We could say this happens because we mistake the flaws and sins committed against us by a person or a group of people for the flaws of the church itself. We must be ready, because if we come to the church and see only that the theology is rich and beautiful, then we will miss the cross, our own crucifixion. Then we will lose our footing and tumble down the ladder into the pit of destruction. It is the cross which bridges the divide between God and man. It is the cross that is the ladder to heaven. And there's a cross for each and every one of us. It's not just for Christ. It's not just for the martyrs. We're all getting a cross. It's like being on Oprah. You get a cross. You get a cross. Fortunately, Christ gives us a cross that we can bear. For most of us, that cross will be humility in the face of adversity in our home, work, and yes, our parish life. Loving others in spite of their faults and offenses, because Christ loves us in spite of ours, because they too are the image of God, and just as we love and revere icons for bearing the image of Christ, He calls us to love one another because we are the image of Christ. Now, this doesn't mean it will be easy or that we won't stumble. After all, it's a dang cross. We can only bear it if we have made the teachings of the church our own, if we live those teachings and allow them to enter into our hearts. God provides the grace, but we have to provide the sweat. So how do we do this? The church gives us many tools: prayer, almsgiving, living the liturgical life of the church, reading the scriptures, and the lives of the saints. By reading the lives of the saints and by comparing our struggles to theirs and our reactions to theirs, we quickly see the differences and we can correct our actions. By asking for their guidance, strength, and intercessions, we learn how to navigate the many struggles we face, be they internal, external, or ecclesial. I know that when things in my own parish life took a turn for the worse, it was the life of St. Luke of Crimea, which was really a constant source of strength for me. And I remember when I came into the church and I wanted to tell my priest about how I had read the Philokalia and I was reading Losky and Avdelkamov and Staniloy. And he said, "Are you reading the lives of the saints?" I thought, well, I'll get to it. And eventually I finally did. And I wish I would have listened to him sooner. Because all the theology that I had read, as beautiful as it was, it didn't prepare me for people in my church, some of whom I love very much, slandering me, slandering my wife, for the effort that we were putting in to participate in the church, to be cast off. But in reading the life of St. Luke of Simferopol, I realized that in spite of the fact that his own fellow bishops, his own priest, betrayed him, he continued to serve others. He didn't give up on the faith. He found solace in prayer and loved others. And that is an incredibly difficult thing to do because it's so easy for us to get offended. We love to talk about humility. We love to talk about piety. But if we can't love others when they betray us, then have we really learned anything? It's for this reason that every Orthodox Christian is baptized in the name of a patron saint. Patronage is a practice of antiquity in which an older, well-established man would take on a younger man, almost like a son. He would tutor him in ethics, politics, philosophy, make introductions to important personages, and the like. The deeds of the young man when he came into adulthood and the honors he accrued were passed on to his patron, and so it was a reciprocal relationship. This is much the relationship we have with the saints, and in particular our patron saints. And so we must read the lives of our patron saints regularly, ask for their intercessions daily, and seek to emulate them in our lives. The lives of the saints are a living theology. They are what it looks like when the commandments and beatitudes are applied to the life of a Christian. And the Lord in his mercy has not just given us examples from ancient times, but down to our own day, men and women of God who wrestled with the spirit of the age, of this age, who ran their race and obtained their crowns. And this is why the new martyrs and confessors of Russia are particularly relevant to us today. Reading their lives and seeking to emulate them so that they will assist in our struggle is to Christians what range time and room or trench clearing drills are to the soldier. They are not optional, they are mission critical. And so, the more we read and emulate the lives of our patron saint and others who often call out to us, the more proficient we will be. And the difference in a Christian between those who read the lives of the saints and those who don't could be comparable to the difference between footage of a Navy SEAL shooting on the range and that of a first-time shooter who doesn't quite grip the shotgun tightly enough. So what does this all have to do with orthodoxy in the South? As we said, the South is a land of missions. Take a look around and you'll see that most parishes are about the size of St. Andrew's here in Lockhart. Most often, it's an ever-growing and shifting lot of inquirers, catechumens, and newly illumined surrounding a priest, his matushka, and a couple zealous families who organize literally everything in the parish. Most missions are held together by the efforts of 4 or 5 people out of the 40 or 50 who attend liturgy. I've learned the last couple of years that organizing the services, learning to do them, maintaining the building, keeping the trains running on time is hard and a mostly thankless effort. There are times where disagreements happen, where tempers flare, where you're maybe even exiled and slandered by the very folks who weeks or even days earlier called you brother or sister. But our parishes and their ability to function are not someone else's Podvig, they are ours. You can't reap the harvest without tilling the ground. You must get your hands dirty. If we want to see a holy Dixie, a land sanctified by prayer and Christian love, which can resist the whims of the world, the external struggles, we first had to build healthy parishes and learn how to deal with the ecclesial struggles, which the Lord has seen fit to send us. It is crucial that we cultivate a culture of service among our catechumens and parishioners in general. Not only will it relieve the burden of those most crucial to the running of the church, it will make nominal members of the parish an integral part of its life, strengthening the bonds of love between all. It will build up the next generation of major and minor clergy, of catechists, wardens, choir directors, brotherhood and sisterhood leaders, and on down the line. It will allow for those who live an hour away from the parish to eventually form a new, stable mission in their own town when the time is right, furthering the spread of the faith into every city and town across the South. But again, most importantly, it will light the fire of Christian love in our parishes, and it is that which spreads the gospel. This can only happen when we are living a truly orthodox life and worldview. And so, I will close this with a call to action by the way of the words one last time of our beloved father in the faith here in America, Father Seraphim Rose. The time of the end, though it may seem to be near, we do not know. However close, it is still in the future. And in the present, we have only the same age-old fight against the unseen powers, against the world, and against our own passions, upon the outcome of which our eternal fate will be decided. Let us then struggle while it is still day, with the time and the weapons which our all-merciful God has given us. Thank you.